Great. Well, nice to be here as part of the forum this year. I'm John Morrison. I'm the CEO of the Institute for Human Rights and Business, and we're delighted that the forum is taking place in a bigger and even better way this year than previous years. I'm very pleased to be with Jasmine O'Connor, OBE. Jasmine is the CEO of Anti-Slavery International, based in London. And I believe Anti-Slavery International is the oldest human rights organization in the world. Jasmine, is that right?
It is, I believe. Good to be with you.
It might feel that some days, but yes, with the abolition of the old forms of slavery, and now, of course, slavery has not gone away. Is it true to say there are more slaves today than at any other time in human history?
Yeah, that would be absolutely the case. I mean, the latest estimates are that there are around 50 million people in modern slavery around the world. So, with the oldest organization, I'd love it if we didn't have to be around anymore, but unfortunately we do.
Yes. We started working with you back in 2012 at the time of the London Olympics. We worked together on a campaign vis-a-vis all the London hotels called the Staff Wanted campaign. I know we even collaborated with the Metropolitan Police then, worried and concerned about human trafficking and potential forced labour in relation to migrant workers in the London hotel sector. That feels like a long time ago for me. But there again, we're looking at another big sporting event. The World Cup in Qatar is coming up at time of recording. And we've been working in Qatar now for a few years on similar issues. And now the Centre for Sport and Human Rights, which is one of our baby organizations, is now is focused on that issue. And again, amongst other things, looking at the hotel sector in Qatar. Why do you think this issue just doesn't go away?
Well, I think it's really challenging when you've got these big sporting events and you have a rapid scale up of infrastructure, and you have firms that are often operating in environments that haven't got the right laws in place, and they're looking at the bottom line and they're wanting to make profit. I think it's an environment that's ripe for modern slavery. And ultimately it doesn't go away, because human beings are one of the most productive commodities that you can have. You can work a human being time and time again and make more and more money. So it's a combination of a lack of having the right laws in place, kind of speedy supply chains that have to get stuff done quickly, and just literally the economics of slavery, making it profitable for different organizations and for criminal gangs. So yes, it doesn't matter wherever you are in the world. If there's a big sporting event, you've got to be on the lookout for slavery, and you've got to be looking and making sure that you're taking the right kind of action. And of course, when you layer into that the migrant workers and the ways in which some organizations will seek to exploit migrant workers in particular, and the discrimination that occurs, then of course that's a huge challenge.
Now, sticking with sport for a moment, earlier this year, Mo Farah, who I think needs no introduction to anybody listening, the British Somali origin athlete, actually came out as a victim of trafficking himself, reminding us that human trafficking isn't just a risk factor off the track, it's also in the stories of people on the track. Obviously, he's very high profile. How has that changed the perceptions of human trafficking, do you think, in the UK and beyond?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I mean, firstly, what a brave man. I mean, anybody who comes out and tells their story as a survivor, is enormously brave. And I think for someone to do that when they are so in the public limelight, I think is quite an extraordinary feat. But I think what's interesting is that I don't know if you saw the documentary that he made, but when you listen to his story, he went through all of the sorts of emotions and challenges that any individual who's been trafficked may have gone through. So he was very nervous about his immigration status and whether it would be affected. And, you know, in coming out and being public about it. And you just think to yourself, this is a, you know, a knight of the realm, you know, a national treasure. How must it be for an individual who's been trafficked and maybe in an insecure immigration setup? You know, how much more difficult would it be for them to come forward? So I think, you know, first and foremost, it underlined the fact that anyone, anywhere can be a victim of trafficking. It really is literally a set of circumstances that could conspire in any individual's life. I think, secondly, just the sort of challenges that individuals face, and from my perspective, the sense in which, you know, Mo Farah's story was embraced, but many other victims up and down the country are frightened to come forward because they are fearful that they may be penalised or criminalised if they have an insecure migration status. They may be frightened of the authorities because they've been told not to go to the authorities under pain of some kind of threat. So, you know, it was great having him come out. It did create a lot of awareness. We were able to talk about things, but sadly, this sort of way in which Mo Farah is treated, you know, is not the way that most victims are treated. And, you know, that's the challenge that we've got, to make sure that every survivor of modern slavery, you know, in a sense, has the treatment and respect that Mo Farah had.
Absolutely.
You know, when he came out, and when he came out with his story, whereas you know, we're seeing sort of conflation between you know, victims of modern slavery, people smuggling, illegal inverted commas migration, and in a sense, you know, victims of slavery are starting to kind of come into the frame of culture wars and be sort of scapegoated.
Yeah. Well, picking up on that issue then, under international law, I think it's the 2000 Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, there is a distinction between human trafficking and human smuggling. They're both separate protocols. And I remember a lot of the discussion at the time to ensure that those people who are trafficked are not seen as the criminals, right? That they are the victims. They don't necessarily even have to be migrants. You can be trafficked and not cross a border. Yet the perception now, and I think almost deliberate politically in this country, we've had a number of home secretaries and prime ministers over recent months, but certainly the previous two have, I think, conflated the issue of human trafficking and human smuggling in relation to people crossing the channel. And even planning to make changes to the UK's Modern Slavery Act that former Prime Minister Theresa May was very proud of. Is this deliberate? This, you know, this toxic environment in which human trafficking is being drawn into? Is this based on any kind of reality, or is it just pure politics?
I think it's pure politics, if I'm frank. I mean, there's no real evidence. Quite frankly, the evidence is to the contrary. You know, there aren't bogus claims in the NRM, which is the referral mechanism for people who have been in sort of slavery in some way. There aren't bogus claims. They are, majority of people coming into that are found to be legitimate victims of slavery. And conflating the you know, suggesting that victims of modern slavery are, in a sense, sort of gaming the immigration system is wholly wrong. Conflating it with smuggling is just a cynical attempt to you know, marginalize groups of individuals who, you know, are sort of you know, in extremely exploitative situations. I think it's a cheap sort of culture war tactic, and you know, this toxic rhetoric really needs to be ended. We're concerned really that the government is essentially, unpicking that Modern Slavery Act. I mean, just the last Home Secretary, I think it was the last one, I'm losing count, but Suella Braverman, moved the slavery brief from the safeguarding minister's portfolio. So it sat in a Home Office minister's portfolio as a part of the safeguarding brief. They've moved it to the immigration brief. Now, of course, it connects with immigration, but as you've rightly said, not all victims of trafficking in the UK will be migrants. You'll have individuals who have been born in Britain and who have been trafficked in Britain, who have been in forced labour in Britain or sexual exploitation in Britain or whatever other form. And so to sort of deliberately try and conflate it with, on the one hand, smuggling and on the other hand, migration, it really is just putting it in this box of, I guess quite sort of toxic rhetoric that there already is around migration. And, we need to challenge that. We need to challenge the toxic rhetoric around migration wholesale, but we also do need to recognise that survivors of modern slavery, are wider than migrants and are both a subset of migration, but are also, potentially British victims.
Right. As a fan of the BBC radio series The Archers, I very much like the way that they framed human trafficking within the context of agriculture, but also as an issue that could face non-migrants as well as migrants. And I think that storyline was very good at putting that across.
Yeah. Maybe we need to ask the Home Secretary to listen to The Archers.
Listen to The Archers a bit more. Next one, whoever the next Home Secretary is, maybe it should
whoever
be an e-tray. Yeah, the compulsory.
I think we're still on Shaps, aren't we? But who knows by the time this airs.
Oh, yeah, great. Maybe he's an Archers fan. Who knows? Just this issue then of, I know you go to great pains to say that the human trafficking is not primarily a migration issue, and I understand that. But the attempts to crack down on human smuggling, which clearly is a migration issue and is the only way that many asylum seekers can actually reach the UK these days, is when I did research in this area, there seemed to be some indication that if you force migrants into the hands of criminal gangs, then the chances of some of them actually ended up being trafficked, even though that wasn't, maybe they were being smuggled originally, but there seems to be this sort of grey area now that the more you criminalize migration, you're introducing more of a market for criminals, therefore you're heightening the risk of some aspects of human trafficking. Would you concur with that analysis? Is that something that you see?
Absolutely. If somebody is, being smuggled, there might be that's a part of their journey, their migrant journey. They want to come to the UK. There's no safe route to do that, and so they turn to the hands of smugglers. The risks of that then being turned into trafficking are quite significant, and I think more research needs to be done. But I do think there is a connection, and we need to be aware of that. And I think the second you close off safe routes of migration and you open up to smugglers, the traffickers aren't far behind.
Right, absolutely. Right. Well, finally, then, to move to the area of law, where there is more law in this area than there was 10 years ago. We have in the US the seizures, the withhold release orders around US customs in relation to forced labor. The European Union now has a proposed directive on mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence and reporting. We have our Modern Slavery Act in the UK. I know that Anti-Slavery has issued petitions around stronger laws in relation to forced labor and particularly the Uyghur situation in relation to business. what are your hopes for any incoming Home Secretary in relation to strengthening the existing legislation we have in the UK?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, let's just sort of say it as it is. The 2015 Modern Slavery Act was a fantastic piece of legislation at the time. It progress, but it's been superseded, and we're sort of lagging behind some of our contemporaries internationally. So there's a couple of areas that we're looking at. I mean, first and foremost, we're going to be working hard to make sure that the new Home Secretary doesn't row back on any of the provisions in the 2015 Act. I think we've got to be clear that the provisions around support for victims and survivors need to increase rather than decrease. So I think we've got to be really mindful that there is a potential attack on those rights. So working quite hard for that. When it comes to the area of business, we're actually working with a wide range of other NGOs to call for a separate piece of legislation. So the 2015 Act, as you know, has a provision called sort of transparency in supply chains, where businesses have to report, have to say what they're doing to address slavery in their supply chains, and they're penalised if they don't report. The problem with that, as you know, is it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't put a mandate on business to be proactive, to look at its business model, to consider how its business model might be driving slavery. I mean, fast and furious supply chains, as we've just discussed around, these big sporting events, that business model helps to drive slavery. So we're looking at something called mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence, because similar provisions are needed around the environments. We're putting it all together and working cross sector that will put much more responsibility on business to take proactive steps. So, looking at the business model, looking at the supply chain, looking at how they interact in particular with workers and the role that workers have, and the way in which there's remedy for workers that goes beyond just compensation. So there's some progress, as you know, at European level, and we've been very much involved in moving that forward, and that's quite exciting. It doesn't quite go far enough, so we're pushing a little bit further, especially on areas such as sort of remedy and areas such as workers' voice. In the UK, we are baby steps with the UK Parliament, but really laying the groundwork to push for similar legislation here. And then, of course, there's the sort of other area, I guess, of legislation where we are looking at sort of import bans and those kind of mechanisms. Yeah. So the mandatory human rights due diligence works, right across the piece, whatever kind of business. The area of sort of import bans works when you've got a wholesale atrocity. So something like state-sponsored labour, or something that, really there are high levels of slavery, and, you're not able to work in this kind of, effective way. So, for example, where you're looking at China and the Uyghur and other Turkic minorities, that's an area where realistically businesses cannot slavery proof their supply chain. It's not possible because of the sort of the all embracing state sponsored nature. And in those sorts of situations, actually direct mechanisms like import bans are what we're looking at. So yeah, there's a lot to be done, and we're sort of moving forward step by step. But there have been some fantastic, movement and progress. But yeah, more to come.
Well, as I said at the beginning, you are the oldest human rights organisation, over 200 years old, I think. I can't remember the dates now, but hopefully you'll be here for another 200 years to come. Well, albeit if slavery is eradicated, you won't be, but let's hope perhaps that you're not needed. Jasmine, thank you for your time today, and thanks for joining the Global Forum on Responsible Recruitment 2022. And good luck with your work, and see you soon. Thank you.
Fantastic. Have a good forum. It's lovely to be with you. Take care.
Cheers.